All right. So thank you for joining us for our webinar for Bridging the Gap between Core ELA Instruction and Literacy Support. We have a link to the presentation that I'll put in the chat for you. And we will go ahead and get started. If you have any questions during the session, you can go ahead and type them in the chat throughout the session. We'll have someone capturing those questions that you submit, and at the end, we'll be sure that we get all of your questions answered. The presentation is being recorded, and it will be posted on the K-12 ELA planning page on the Louisiana Believes website. And there's the link to the deck. So by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand the content literacy supports in grades 3-12 for ELA, explain grade band specific best practices for monitoring literacy, and incorporate supports when planning to teach a lesson from your high quality instructional materials. On this webinar today, we have the ELA team and the literacy team joining together to present this information to you. My name is Kenna Magana. I'm the ELA supervisor, and I have my two wonderful teammates, Allie St. Germain and Erin Hughes, here with me today. And we also have Natalie. Would you like to introduce you and Sarah?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Kleber, and I am the supervisor of literacy strategy. And Sarah, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi guys. I am Sarah Stolman. Seen a lot of familiar names there. Great to see you guys. I am a K-5 literacy PD specialist in the literacy team.
Great, and we're so excited to share this information with you today. And we'll go ahead and get started with Sarah.
Hey guys, well, welcome.
Hey Sarah, one second. I'm sorry, Sarah. Kenna,
Okay.
there's must be some sharing. An issue with the sharing of the document. I'm getting some share requests on my end. Can you check the permissions on that? Thank you.
Okay, so we'll kind of jump in right now. And, we wanted to kind of set some context for you guys. Like, why is it important for us to have this discussion today? And probably the best place for us to start is by sharing, like, what does the data say? What do we know now about where we are at in terms of our literacy goals here in Louisiana? So we could go to the next slide. Okay, so our 2022 NAEP scores were very exciting. They indicated that Louisiana had the highest rate of growth in ELA, in reading scores in the nation. So that was very, very exciting. Our 2023 third grade LEAP results showed a 5% increase in those students scoring mastery. And our 2023 end-of-year literacy screener results indicate that about 62% of our kindergarten students, 60% of our first grade students, 55.8% of our second grade students, and 54.5% of our third grade students scored at or above benchmark. Now, we can look at these scores and we can be like, okay, we're seeing some growth and everything. But they also reveal that we have quite a bit of work to do. We have a long way to go before we can ensure that all of our students are where they need to be in terms of their literacy achievement. We know that now about 71% of 8th grade students fall below the proficient level in their ability to read and comprehend the meaning of text at their grade level, according to those 2022 NAEP data results for Louisiana. So even though we're moving in the right direction and we're doing many great things, we still have a long way to go. And so it's really incumbent upon us as educators to really do as much as we can to ensure that our students are, they continue to grow until all of our students are where they need to be. If you could jump onto that next slide, please. Okay. So where do we begin? Well, we begin with an understanding of the science of reading. And so for those of you guys who are in grades K through 3, you've recently participated or completed the science of reading training. But for those of you who are not in K3, you may not have participated in science of reading training. And so you might be hearing this kind of floating around, what is the science of reading? Or you're hearing people talk about the science of reading. And it's important for us to be able to define what is the science of reading. And so the Reading League convened a group of literacy experts to develop a definition of what do we mean by the science of reading. And what they came up with is that the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. Now, for studies to be considered scientifically based research, so to be considered part of the science of reading, these studies must be either experimental or quasi-experimental. They must have a detailed description of the study methods to allow for replication or refinement of findings, and they must be published in a peer-reviewed journal. And the reason why this is important is because we want to ensure that what we're sharing with our teachers and the resources that we're sharing with our teachers are not just kind of developed, by a panel of researchers within the, within the corporation that's developing this curriculum or this resource, but they truly are grounded in science. And these are the expectations to consider something as being grounded in science. And so this is important to the science of reading. You can kind of jump to that next slide. So this research that we're talking about is not new. So, science of reading, you might have started to hear this recently, but people have been doing this research for decades, right? This research has been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world, not even just here in the United States. And it's derived from thousands of studies that have been conducted in multiple languages, so not even just English. And what we know is that the science of reading has culminated in a preponderance of evidence. It consistently points us in the same direction to inform us how proficient reading and writing develop. We know the best ways to teach students to read and write. And this is scored or undergirded by the science, right? We also know why some students have difficulty. We know what's happening in those brains. And we also know how we can most effectively assess and teach, and therefore improve those student outcomes through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. We know the best way to do this work, right? The science consistently points us in that direction. What we also know is that the science of reading is derived from research in multiple fields. So it's not just science of reading in, education programs or among scholars of education or pedagogy, right? The science of reading is derived from research in cognitive psychology, communication sciences, developmental psychology, education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience, school psychology. All of these different fields do research that point us in the same direction. If you want to know more about this, I would encourage you to look at the definition there on the Reading League website, and they go into great detail about what is included there. But know that the science comes from all of these different areas. Okay. Now, what the science of reading is not is also very important to share with you guys. So the science of reading is not an ideology or philosophy. You're not either for the science of reading or you're not, right? It's not a particular stance, right? The science of reading refers to what the science shares with us is the best way to teach students to read and write. It's also not a fad. It's not the new way we're doing things. You'll hear, people talk about, oh, the pendulum is now swinging back this way. no, the science of reading is kind of an evolving understanding of what is the best way to teach our students to read. It's not simply a pendulum swing or a fad or a new trend. It's not a political agenda. It's also not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not you do this with this, all your students, and this is going to work. It's not a single program of instruction. And it's also not a single specific component of instruction such as phonics. Right? And it encompasses all of the different components of great reading instruction. And so that's really important to keep in mind when people are just saying, you know, oh, that science of reading, it's just now, this is what we're doing now. What will we be doing in 5 years? Hopefully in 5 years, we're still aligning our work to the science of reading. Okay. So what does the science of reading share with us, or what do we know is how students learn to read? And I think more than anything, this is truly encapsulated in the simple view of reading, right? And you know, if you've seen Scarborough's reading rope, if you've seen this this infographic before, you know that reading comprehension, right? Our ultimate goal, we want students to be able to read and make sense of what they read. Reading comprehension is our ultimate goal, right? We know that is the product of decoding ability and language comprehension. And we say product because when we think about multiplication, what happens when you multiply something by 0, right? Your answer is 0, right? So we know that students have to have skills in both of these areas, and the product of these two particular areas leads to strong reading comprehension. When we think about decoding, we're thinking about those lower strands of Scarborough's reading rope. Can students apply what they know about sound symbol relationships? A says ah, CH says ch, and they can apply that knowledge to put words together and ultimately read words automatically with fluency. And can they understand language, right? Can they make sense of what they read? Oftentimes, if you have students who have issues with decoding ability, these are the students who really just need support with reading foundations. They might have gaps in their foundational skills knowledge. And students who have gaps in that knowledge, their reading comprehension is also going to suffer, right? But in the same way, you may have students who are very proficient at sounding out the words, who can read all of the words, but who have major gaps in their language comprehension, right? Maybe their vocabulary is poor, their background knowledge is poor. If they have gaps there, that's where those gaps need to be filled. But we know that solid reading comprehension is dependent upon skill in both of these areas. Students have to be proficient in both of these areas if they're going to be able to read and make sense of what they read. And that is what the science kind of consistently shows us. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about what the progression of literacy practices across the grade bands looks like. Okay, oral language. This is the first thing that we think about when we think about good literacy instruction. And if you're a pre-K teacher, if you have pre-K students at home, you know the importance of this. Oral language is critical to beginning reading. This should be done throughout the lesson and on a daily basis. You're constantly, if you're reading a text aloud to students, you're asking them questions. Your expectations for how they communicate their answers should be high. They should respond in complete sentences, none of these yeah responses. But we develop oral language by having students listen to your teacher read, listen to the teacher read, present information, have discussions among themselves, either whole class or with partners or in small groups, but we want the kids talking. We want our students talking. We know that communicating their ideas is essential for developing that language comprehension, and we need them to do that work. This is especially helpful for developing the proficiency of English language learners and students with disabilities. And this isn't just the work of the pre-K teacher, right? Upper elementary, middle, high, we want these students talking in the same way. You know, Natalie's going to talk to you guys about some amazing resources that are going to get those kids talking, right? And we want our students to do this. We don't just want silence in those classrooms. We want kids talking. We want them talking about text, talking about their thinking, sharing their thinking. And then we go into phonological awareness. And so phonological awareness is that ability to be able to hear and manipulate sounds. Basic phonological awareness is just identifying words in a sentence, syllables, rhyming words, alliteration, beginning blending and segmenting. This is not looking at words. This is not reading print. This is all auditory, right? Like hearing and manipulating the sounds in spoken words. This work is typically done in grades pre-K, K, and 1. But if you have students who have gaps in this area, you need to be doing this work whatever grade level you're in. Advanced phonological awareness, and I'll just kind of go back real quick. Advanced phonological awareness is just that manipulation of sounds. Blending and segmenting. You know, I hear the sounds in the word cat are k, at. Let's change that first sound to mm. This is work you do in grades 1, 2, and even into 3rd grade. But again, if there are gaps here, you continue that work until the students have mastered those skills, whatever the grade level might be. Go to the next one. Phonics is a biggie, right? This is the one when we think about the science of reading, people's mind often go here, even though all of these things are, considered the science of reading. But early phonics is letter naming, letter sound correspondences, teaching students all of the sounds that the letters make, the different sound spellings are, controlled vowels, digraphs, diphthongs, all of these different things that we teach students about our code, the code of English language. This work is done largely in grades K and 1. That advanced phonic work is done in grades 2, 3, and again, beyond. If you're using the FIRE lessons, you know that you're extending this work into 3, 4, 5, but you extend this work until the students have it. So if you have 8th graders who don't know that CH says, shh, you're doing this work there. They need to learn these basic phonics skills and they need to be able to apply them in order to read. And then we get into text fluency. So this is students reading sentences, phrases, passages. This is essential for students to be able to read with sufficient fluency to support comprehension, right? Things that you can do to improve fluency. Read aloud. When students hear what good reading sounds like, having students read, tracking the words with their eyes or their fingers, choral reading, partner reading, small group fluency support, and you're doing all of these things typically beginning in grade 1, right? We're not expecting our kindergarten students to be able to read long passages fluently. They're really just learning to apply the basic code. But all of these things are going to support fluent reading. And so if you have a 7th grader who is not a fluent reading, these are things that you can do with them as well. And we do have some links here in the presentation that will take you to resources that will provide you with support in implementing these things in your classroom. Okay, so when we think about vocabulary comprehension and writing, Natalie, do you want to jump in here, Natalie Kleber?
Sure.
Like I'm kind of looking at you. This is your wheelhouse right here. So like
I claim the upper part of the rope. Sarah claims the lower part of the rope a lot of times. Yeah. So these are all skills that definitely come through in kindergarten through 12th grade as well. Really even pre-K if we're talking about like listening comprehension versus reading comprehension. But vocabulary is something that sometimes we can teach it in context. Sometimes students need direct and explicit instruction on certain words that are really just essential to understanding that text, morphology. And again, like Sarah said, both of those are live links that you can click on for more resources with that. Comprehension, these are just 4 main things to support comprehension, but comprehension is a very complex skill. There's a lot of things that go into comprehension. The good news is there's a lot of things you can do to help comprehension because it is so complex. Summary writing is one of the most inclusive things you can do to build comprehension skills. Because if you're truly writing a good summary, you have an overall just statement and you have some details to support that. There's a lot of skills that even go into just that. Using graphic organizers to support comprehension, helping students understand that graphic organizer and however it is organized is how you want to start organizing that information in your brain so that you can call back on that information later. Writing is another great thing to do to support comprehension, writing in regards to the text, asking text-based questions so that students can go back and recall what that's about, making deeper connections there. And then there's also some general comprehension strategies at the bottom for that. Lastly, writing. And writing is something we should start with as early as possible, and we should build on year after year after year in regards to complexity. But when I say writing, there's lots of different things we can do through that writing. We can talk about syntax and semantics, grammar, how words are used, but we can also talk about writing structures. What should an introduction look like? What does a quality paragraph sound like, a body paragraph? So those are all different places you can go through to target writing. Again, these should happen in grades K through 12 and increase as grade levels increase. And here's just a chart that kind of just outlines for you that progression. Like Sarah said, wherever you're starting out, like if you're in KN1 and students are struggling with phonemic awareness, until students master that phonemic awareness, they may still need to be working on it upwards 7th, 8th, 9th grade, if that's still something they're struggling with. So this kind of just shows you that progression, but oral language, vocabulary, comprehension, and writing are something that should be developed year after year after year after year. We never get complete with that. Even as adult learners, we can still build our complexity and our understanding there. All right, so now we're going to talk about what does this look like in action. So there's some things that we can do with our tier 1 instruction that can really help us to access these things. If you have students that are not on grade level, there's some things, some whole group moves that we can do to really help them access the text and read about it, write about it, and have these discussions around it. Literacy inside of the content area really is more than just reading. Our goal is to improve speaking, listening, reading, and writing. I want you to consider the opportunities presented in your curriculum to highlight different areas of the rope. And when I say areas of the rope, where is an opportunity to highlight grammar? Where is there an opportunity to highlight literary knowledge? Engage all students in the classroom in all aspects of literacy. So if you're doing a read aloud, do you know that every student is tracking either with their eyes or with their finger what you're reading? Are you really building their fluency by having them see the word and hear the word repeatedly? If you're doing a writing, is every single student in the classroom doing the writing? Is the expectation the same for each child, but you might have different scaffolds to help that child get there? This is how we really want to do to build content area literacy skills. Okay, so content area literacy involves basic content comprehension and writing skills. Until these skills are mastered, you have to build competency here before moving on. Skills such as partner reading, analyzing rubrics, annotating text are crucial to proficiency before moving on to more demanding literacy skills. And I'll show you in a second what more demanding literacy skills I'm talking about. But I think a takeaway I want you guys to have is even if you're 6 through 12, students still have just as strong of a need for direct and explicit instruction as they do in K-5. So if we're annotating text and you haven't explicitly taught them a routine for annotating text, modeling how you annotate the text and what it makes you think about on a daily basis, they need more of that before they really become proficient with that themselves. Okay, so we hear disciplinary literacy a lot, and this is where our partners in the other content areas kind of help us out with the literary lift. So content literacy involves, like I said, basic content comprehension, basic writing skills. These are the skills embedded in Scarborough's reading rope, and they are used across all subject areas. Disciplinary literacy, on the other hand, is the knowledge and abilities used by those who create and communicate the knowledge within the disciplines. So this is when we start to hear things like reading like a historian, thinking like a scientist. In order for students to be able to go into science and social studies and other places and do these things, they have to be really competent with content literacy skills. And that's where your main lift comes in as an ELA teacher. Both of them involve reading, writing, listening, speaking, and both of them involve text. Okay, so this is a neat graphic that we had permission to use from Joan Sedita, who is the author of Keys to Literacy. And it talks about basic literacy and where that kind of falls in. It also talks about disciplinary and content literacy. So disciplinary and content literacy should be happening inside of Tier 1 instruction. We still have to provide some accommodations and modifications and scaffolds, but all students in Tier 1 should have access to these kinds of skills. So more advanced reading strategies, but also just general vocabulary comprehension and writing strategies. If students are still struggling with basic literacy skills inside of grades 3 through 12, especially 4 through 12, these things should be worked on in Tier 2 and Tier 3. And we're going to have some more guidance coming out around tiered systems of support coming out too. So be on the lookout for that. All right, so one of the things that was developed to really help teachers in helping students access the text, no matter where their level is, was something called the Content Literacy Series. And they are all linked here. I'll show you how to access them as well. Kenna is putting the Literacy Library link in the chat. Thank you, Kenna. So if you click on that, the second pillar, instruction, intervention, and extension, is where you can find the entire series, even if you don't have this presentation. So later on, if you're going back to look and say, where did I see that? That's where you can find it. But simple things sometimes that we take for granted, and are we doing it the right way? Whole class read aloud, partner reading, independent reading, annotating, direct and explicit vocabulary instruction. Sometimes we think we're doing these well, but we're missing some of that explicit piece. And if you can leverage that and really include the explicit piece from these strategies, you're going to notice a huge, huge shift in your classrooms with students being able to access the information. Then we have our writing strategies. So using rubrics inside of your instruction. Sometimes we have rubrics, as teachers, we have rubrics that go with our main writings or culminating writing task or whatever writings you have in your curricula. And sometimes we even share them with the students, right? But sometimes we don't always go through with the student how to use that rubric as a guide to their own writing before they even begin. And that can become such a powerful tool. This strategy walks you through how to do that. Using student exemplars as part of the writing process. So if you have a really great piece of writing, either you yourself have it, it comes from the curriculum, or a student writes it, how do you leverage that to copy those same skills and capacity with the rest of your class? That strategy is going to walk you through that, and you're actually going to do that with me in a second. Writing frames, how to use writing frames. Sometimes we know that's a good modification to a lesson. We might be using those with our Ls or SPED students, but we're not showing them explicitly how to use them. It's still how to have the same level of rigor when they're using them as a student without a disability. Summary writing to develop comprehension, writing for a purpose, and creating a claim. All of these can be used across the content area. I know we have ELA teachers with us today, but share these with your whole school, because if you're using the same strategy that the science teacher is using, the social studies teacher is using, it becomes very powerful when they're used across the campus. And then be on the lookout, because we have a discussion tracker, a Socratic seminar, and a fishbowl discussion. Being ELA teachers, most of you have access to these already. These are really going to be to help out our science and social studies and math teachers, because it's not something that's inherent in some of those other content areas. Okay, so now I'm going to become the teacher. This is not normal for a webinar, I know, but you're going to become the student. And I'm going to need you to come off of mute and talk to me and say the things. I'm going to have volunteers, and then I might even have voluntold with my team if nobody volunteers. But the point of this activity is for you to really see what this looks like in the classroom. We're also in the process of building a video library, so you can see these in action in the classroom. But for today, I just want you to get a feel for really what they look like if you're doing them correctly. So this first experience, student experience, is partner reading, okay? So good afternoon, class. Y'all can literally unmute and tell me good afternoon. Tell me.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Kenna. Okay, so class, today we're going to be partner reading The Treasure of Lemon Brown by Walter D. Myers. Our purpose for reading today is to analyze Greg's perception of his father and Lemon Brown by making evidence-based inferences. Now, this is our first read through, so I don't want you annotating just yet for his perception and his father. I just want you listening for when you hear Greg interacting with his father and Lemon Brown, okay? So when we're partner reading, I'm going to be partner A, and I'm going to have somebody be partner B, okay? And when I'm reading, I want to make sure that I'm reading word by word. I'm reading with the appropriate fluency, the appropriate expression. When partner A, who is me, is reading, partner B is tracking those words. They're looking word for word for word. They're listening for the word. They're looking at the word so they can build their fluency. This is really going to help you to become a better reader. Okay. All right. So Kenna, do you want to click on the source for me? You might have to come out and yeah. Presenting with Natalie is always fun. I have people doing crazy things. All right, so here we go. The Treasure of Lemon Brown. So do I have a volunteer for B? If not, I can volunteer a team member. Takes a minute to get off. All right, I'm gonna be A. Kenna, you go ahead and be B for me, okay? All right, so A, the dark sky filled with angry swirling clouds reflected Gregory's mood as he sat on the stoop of his building. His father's voice came to him again, first reading the letter the principal had sent to the house, then lecturing endlessly about his poor efforts in math.
I had to leave school when I was 13, his father had said. That's a year younger than you are now. If I'd had half the chances you have, I'd...
Thanks, Kenna. So what I would do is if we were in a whole group training right now, I would actually partner you off and have you read C for me together in a group. And if you are not a teacher, if you're a leader of some sort, whether it's an instructional coach, a district level leader, a school level leader, I really encourage you to do this activity with your staff, because what starts to happen as partners A and B read paragraph 3 is that you start to notice some different things happen when partner reading that we don't anticipate when students do it. The first thing that my participants notice is that there's a lot of distractions happening as they're doing partner reading. So that really helps them be more intentional about minimizing distractions in the classroom when you're partner reading. You might notice that you have certain students that really have to be in a special area when they're partner reading, like the student who just cannot focus to save their life. They might have a corner of the room, and that's part of your strategy or your routine when you do that strategy, but you're being really intentional about that. You're also constantly monitoring what I call a level 1 volume when they're reading. And so that means that only your partner should hear you, and you're redirecting them every time that volume gets too loud. When you have students, and this is appropriate for any grade level that is able to read, so first all the way through 12th grade, but really focusing in on those students who can't read in the upper grades, very seldom, if ever, do we call on students who are struggling readers to read out loud. So what happens when we do that is we never give them the opportunity to get better with literacy after that, because those are the same students that I can assure you are not independently reading when you tell them to either. So partner reading is so important to really helping to build their confidence as readers, to help them build their fluency as readers in a whole class capacity. And if done the right way, it really can be a powerful tool, but you really want to make sure that you're doing it exactly as intended. One more quick note here is that when you are partnering or pairing your students, you really want to be intentional about doing that right here. You want to have most times a high student with a low student, because you can't have low students are not going to be able to push each other. You want to be very clear about your culture at the beginning, letting students know this will not be your partner or your pair for the whole year. This is for a little while. I promise I'm going to help you build your capacity wherever you are before I release you. Sorry, guys, I'm going to hear. I don't know if y'all can hear the loudspeaker. But you want to go ahead and do that. If you have L students in your room, you want to partner native language speakers together whenever possible so that they can code switch when it's time to go ahead and do the discussion piece, but read in English when it's time for the partner reading. Okay. So what were some, just for the purposes of time, I'm going to go ahead and kind of answer this for you. But some teacher moves are that I previewed the text first. I modeled what good fluency looked and sounded like. I ensured that partner B was tracking as I was reading if I'm in the classroom with them. I redelivered expectations several times. I explained to the students why we're partner reading. A lot of times we just tell students to do that. They don't know why they're doing that. Two things can happen. If they don't know why it's important, they're not going to do it like we want them to. But also, when you tell somebody why something's important, they store that in their brain a different way because they know why it's important. They know when to use it again. So with any of the content literacy strategies, please make sure you communicate why it's important. Some student moves should have been that they were tracking the text themselves, they're being good listeners, they're being good readers when it's their turn to model reading, they're extracting information the way they need to. And this practice done this way will really affect student outcomes by building a more confident reader across your class, no matter where their reading levels are. Okay, can you click on partner reading down at the bottom for me, Kenna? Okay, so here's what all the strategies kind of look like. They start out by showing you what the name of the support is, when it could be applicable in the different content areas, who it could support. It has the purpose of this particular support, whatever that support is, and why it's so important to communicate the purpose of it. Then there's a very detailed process for each one. So who would have thought that partner reading was 6 explicit steps? Well, when it's done this way, it is that many steps. Can you scroll down to the bottom for me? They all end with, I know I'm successful when. So if you're successfully doing partner reading, you should see these things happening in your classroom. And then it has additional considerations. And these are great for students with disabilities, for English language learners, or maybe just for any student who needs more support, even within this support. Okay, so this next one, we're going to kind of start, but we're not going to be able to get all the way through because I want to save some time for Allie and for questions as well. But this one is called Student Experience Using Student Exemplars. Okay, so this particular lesson, just some background, is from a culminating writing task from photojournalism in ELA guidebooks unit. And the question that they're going to have to answer on this is, how have photographers inspired change through photojournalism? When you're doing student exemplars as a tool in your class, I highly recommend not using it in its entirety. Really focus in on what you're trying to get students to be more proficient in. So for this particular one, I highlighted the yellow. Because in this particular class, we're assuming that my students today don't know how to really write a strong claim statement. So although the whole introduction is here, I'm really zoning in and focusing on that claim piece. And the support's going to tell you what areas you could focus in on. It's going to show you different components within rubrics that you could call out. It also has these questions I have scaffolded at the bottom. They're going to have those same questions that you can pull from if you're not sure what questions to ask about the exemplar, but you're also welcome to make your own questions if you're not sure, okay? So my claim statement is, this movement towards change is accomplished through the photos that photojournalists take, which document history and the lived experiences of people, which has brought awareness to situations that might seem foreign to people, as well as being a catalyst for change. So I have this up on some chart paper in my room. The claim statement is on chart paper. I also have these questions outlined, and I have space under each question for me to record the responses from my students, okay? So the very first question I'm asking is, how does this claim fully respond to the question? So I start eliciting answers from my students, okay? And they might tell me, okay, it's a complex sentence. They might tell me that it restates part of like the question words are in the answer. It might state that I can find different things within here. One thing that's linked in this support is how to do the claim writing too, because if you're as a teacher are not sure what's in a strong claim statement, that can be found in that support as well. If students are not giving you the correct answers, if you're wanting more, I encourage you to scaffold some more questions. So for instance, if they didn't tell me that it is a complex sentence, I might ask them, what do you notice about this particular sentence? What do you notice about the details in it? You can ask them those kinds of questions to get them to the answer. The second thing says, what steps might the student have used when constructing this claim? If I had to tell you a most important part about this one, that would be the one. Sometimes we're so intimidated by writing because we don't know what process to follow. The more we can put a process to it, the better the students are going to be able to duplicate that process. So for instance, some things that I might hear back from students are, the very first thing they did was go back to their annotations to really search for that answer. They made sure that they had 4, 5, 6 pieces of evidence to justify this answer. Another thing they might have done, step 3, might have been to ensure that they had all the question words in the answer. Step 4 might have been after they had an initial sentence, They went back and said how or why to extend that sentence to really give them more details in the sentence. But you want to help them lay out steps so they can duplicate that in future lessons. What are some qualities of this claim statement that make it a great claim statement? You want to leave this up after you get the students' responses. You want to leave this up for the entire writing process. And if it helps them, you can leave it up as an anchor chart whenever you're doing writing, so they can come back and refer back to that to build their capacity. If students are seeing good writing, if you're defining a process for how to produce that good writing, if you're giving them feedback on what makes it great, you're going to have every student in your class becoming a more proficient writer. Okay, so teacher moves is a big one for this because that particular exemplar came from the curriculum, but I actually even tweaked the claim statement a little bit myself, even just because I'm a stickler for the claim statement being in one solid sentence and not being chunked up. But you're welcome to do that. You're welcome to use what they have in the curriculum. I really encourage you to make your own exemplars too, though, even outside of the curriculum. The more you understand what mastery looks like and the more you're able to communicate that to the students and how you got there, it really helps them to become more proficient with it too. So the first thing I had to do was I had to produce some kind of exemplar or find an exemplar. I went to a fantastic classroom today. They're starting the first day of the unit. In the back of the room, they have the culminating writing task in the back. They've already reviewed it the prior day. And they asked the students, what do you need to be successful with this writing? And they have sticky notes all over this bulletin board for how they need to be successful. If we're front loading and backwards designing units that way, they're going to become so much more proficient anyway. So think about your teacher moves to really highlight this strategy. Student moves are they're doing the lift. If students are the ones that actually give me the criteria to being successful, guess what? They're going to be successful all day long because they've given you the criteria rather than us always giving them the criteria for what's successful and us guiding them that way. Okay, and then I'm not going to click on it because it looks the same as the other one did. But when you go to that pillar 2, Kenna, can you click on the literacy library for me real quick? Because there's 2 things I want you to see. I want you to see how to access these supports, but there's also a training that goes with each and every one. And I want you to see where that can be found too. Okay, so when we click on the literacy library, we click on pillar 2, instruction, intervention, and extensions. And we'll scroll down a little bit. This is where we see the content literacy support series. So all of these strategies that I'm talking to you about today can all be found there. Can you click on pillar 3 for me? Go back and click on pillar 3 for me, Kenna. Pillar 3 is our professional growth. So scroll all the way to the bottom. The very bottom says grades 3 through 12, literacy support PD series. Sessions 5 through 11 are exactly how to do each one of these. I'm the teacher, you're the student, and I'll walk you through how to use each piece of the content literacy series, just like I did you today with the student exemplars and the partner reading. Okay. All right, so just some quick reflection that I want you to think about. Can you see yourself using this or coaching others to use these particular strategies? What do you think will change in student outcomes if we use these strategies? And what questions do you still have? And I know the team has posted if you have questions in the chat, we'll definitely address them by the end of the webinar. But we would love to hear your questions. If you're looking for other supports that aren't here for literacy and how to help the students engage in your classroom, please let us know because we would love to add to that too.
Alrighty, so I'm going to take over at this point. Sorry for having my camera off today, guys. I'm having some connectivity issues, so I'm trying to save some bandwidth on my end. But we just gave you guys a lot of information, a lot of background information about the science of reading, content literacy. And I bet you're wondering now, well, okay, I have this HQIM. How do I do it and not make this just one more extra thing that I need to do in my plan?
It looks like we just lost Allie. I will go ahead and voice over this information for her. Poor thing has had issues all day. So in order to plan to implement supports for literacy, there are three main questions that you want to ask yourself. What does the data say? What does the HQIM say? And what does the schedule say? When considering what the data says, analyze the assessment data from the curricular assessments. This could include informal assessments and anecdotal notes, formative assessments from daily lessons, or curriculum-specific diagnostics. You want to identify what challenges are present with your unique learning environment that's illustrated by the data. Then form groups of students that share common challenges. Next, you want to use the data that you analyze and apply it to the high-quality instructional materials you implement in your classroom. Preview the upcoming assessments and lessons. Identify where you anticipate there to be some challenges based on the information, the data that you have, and how you can address that with the content of upcoming lessons. Finally, you want to schedule when your supports will be implemented. You want to annotate your lesson notes to include at what point of the lessons your supports will benefit the identified students the most. The idea is not to remediate, but to support students in accessing the skill and knowledge with a scaffolding approach within the context of the core instruction, not in isolation. You want to review the instructional minutes available to implement the lesson and plan for logical, data-informed adjustments to pacing that's going to allow you to provide your students with the needed supports to access the grade level content. You want to set the date and time for when and how you plan to include the supports within your lesson.
Wow, Kenna, thank you for coming in clutch on that one. I'm back, guys, just as I just said that I'm having some connectivity issues. All righty. So what does this look like in action then? When you are determining what the data says frequently for weekly planning, you want to use relevant data that is also current. These opportunities can be found in your high-quality instructional materials that may include diagnostics, exit tickets, discussions, evidence-based extended responses, and even other formative assessments that are done within the core instruction. Kenna's going to go ahead and drop in the chat the section diagnostic data collection tool. And we're going to go through what this would look like going through some data that would be within ELA guidebooks. So we're using ELA guidebooks as an example, but this is not just for ELA guidebooks. This can be within any HQIM that you are using. You can go ahead and click again, Kenna. So when we start with a teacher exemplar, we want to make sure the criteria for success is based on the curricular assessment being analyzed. We'll review student work based on specific performance descriptors, determine the level of success each student sample represents for knowledge gained. We want to repeat this process to determine the level of success each student sample represents for skills applied during the task. Now the teacher is able to drill down student need for specific supports. And then finally, we summarize the data to identify areas of strength and areas of weakness to strategically plan for supports in upcoming lessons. The benefit of using assessments within your HQIM is to get a clear picture of your unique learning community. After analyzing the data, preview upcoming lessons to determine where additional knowledge building or skill development is needed for students to access the upcoming tasks in the lessons. This way, students are still getting the support they need to build understanding, as well as accessing grade level content. I just got another notification that I might be dying again. So I'm gonna try and stay here with you guys. All right, so I'm gonna show you an example of what this looks like within HQIM. Now that the data has been analyzed, let's go ahead and look ahead to determine what the curriculum says. Let's look at the grade 4 American Revolution unit from ELA Guidebooks 3-5-2022 to better understand how to track the knowledge and skills. The culminating task asks students to write a letter as either George Washington or King George and state whether or not the American Revolution was an act of treason or a justified fight for freedom. Let's dig deeper into the unit to see how this topic is built in order for students to respond knowledgeably. In section 1, it starts off with students understanding the British role in the American colonies and the day in the life of the colonists. Then we build on that with section 2 by introducing a variety of reasons that the colonists were not happy with how they were being governed. Section 3 explains the division is perspective of the colonists that form two distinct groups of colonists. The patriots that wanted to separate from British rule and the loyalists that wanted the governing structure to remain the same as it had always been. In section 4, it further explains how and why some patriot leaders led the fight for freedom. Section 5 shows the other side of the fight, where students learn that not all colonists and other people living in the colonies benefited from declaring independence. And finally, students wrap up their knowledge building sections with section 6 and participate in a debate about the American Revolution being an act of freedom or treason. This directly sets them up for the culminating task by thinking through the reasons both groups of colonists felt about the American Revolution and hearing a variety of evidence from both sides of the debate. When you are unpacking your units and looking at your lessons and going through how you're going to support your unique learning environments, it's important to provide high quality questions. This would be in addition to what's already included in the curricula. So if including questioning as a support within a lesson, the quality and timing of the question included are imperative. Prepare students for a variety of assessment question types through high quality questions that engage students, promote deep analysis of text, and build the necessary knowledge and skills to analyze other texts. It's important that these questions either help students get to that grade level standard or are actually asking them that grade level standard. We don't want to keep them at a below grade level level. When you plan for supports, you use the knowledge and skills students need to access a text or a task in your core instruction. This can be done whole class or in small group. This is dependent on your unique learning environments as you unpack your upcoming lessons. Determine which class configuration will align with the identified support and plan pacing accordingly.
I know that you've received a lot of information in a little bit of time. We're so thankful that you took the time to join us this afternoon, but we wanted to make sure that we provided some time for you to ask any questions that you may have. Erin's been taking down notes of any questions that came through the chat, and she'll share those with us. And anybody else, if you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask your question.
Thanks, Kenna. The one question that I saw that I don't think has been answered yet came early in the session. And I think this might be a question for you, Natalie. Recommending resources for fluency passages.
Thanks, Erin. Some of your best fluency passages are going to come from your curriculum, directly from your curriculum. If you're in K2, all of those curricula have them in addition to. If you're using guidebooks or another curricula, you can usually find them there as well. Another great source, though, outside of that, even if you just need a lot more to practice with, Achieve the Core has really great protocols for fluency, as well as fluency passages on grade level. I really encourage you, though, whenever you're doing fluency, to tie it to whatever you're covering as much as possible, so that you're double dipping on background knowledge as well as building fluency within the topic.
Absolutely. And we had some other kind of comments left, not questions, but Justin, he mentioned how he loved how the guidebooks has us analyze the culminating task at the beginning of the unit. And that really helps with, students understanding what they're writing at the beginning of the unit. And it gives them that clear direction, so they know where they're going throughout the unit. And Jessica added that they hang their culminating task on the board the entire unit, and it makes it really easy to link those daily lessons to that culminating task when the students are seeing it every day. So I think those are really, really great.
They are. And please, guys, that's a best practice. So no matter what curricula you're using, that's just a great best practice to do the backwards design and the expectations at the beginning of the unit. Great call out.
Absolutely. And I know that we're running a little low on time here today, but I wanted to make sure that you had our contact information so you can reach out to us with questions that you have after this webinar. So you can reach the ELA content team at elaguidebooks@la.gov. And the literacy team, you can reach them at louisianaliteracy@la.gov. We're always happy to answer your questions. We get back to you as soon as we can. I know we might be in the field some days, and that kind of adds us a little bit of a delay, and we're not able to respond maybe as urgently as we normally would. But, we definitely get back to your emails, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have and support you as you do the wonderful work of supporting our teachers and instructing our students in Louisiana. So thank you all for joining us today.
And just to let you guys know, I dropped the last thing in the chat were all of the links to the that we shared during the webinar today.